Okay, hola all, welcome back to Soul Mechanics. So, this video technically is the second part of the series. Sidetrack series began with the religion video that was our not entirely spectacular 100 subs special, but obviously it's not titled religion, and we will get to why in just a moment. However, it is indeed a part of that series, which is going to continue over into various other topics. They're all interconnecting, and ultimately this is kind of a prep work sort of series of videos for continuing the secular theology course, which I do intend to do as soon as possible. Actually, I'm going to hopefully get on top of that first thing, next thing. But as it happens with the first religion video, I got a little carried away and Liara decided to cut me off. Thankfully, honestly, it was a fortunate thing because I was ranting and I was just carrying off in a direction that I had not intended to be going. So, to recap on that, we pretty much spoke to the primary values that make up religion as a conceptual design, really. And what I'm trying to do here, which is what I'm going to do with the secular theology course in perfect fashion, but what I'm trying to just kind of, as I said, prep for here, is point out how religion is in fact designed. Getting down to the question of whether or not religion was deliberately designed in this way by people for specific reasons, or whether it's an inherent property of the human psyche. We'll have to, as I've stated so many times before, burn that bridge when we fucking get to it. But for now, I'm just gonna, sidetrack on this one concerning the issue, the topic. So, to briefly recap, we spoke on how the primary two values that make religion happen, the core or foundation of its design, is going to be the concept that you have a soul that can be damaged or tarnished in some way, that is subject to a reward and penalty system, and that there is a great deal of fear to be implemented or involved in the scenario of managing or caring for this soul as though it were some kind of a pet you have, or maybe you're the pet. We don't know really. There's no concrete discernment as to whether you are the soul and the body is something you have, or you are the body and the soul is something you have. Of course, Soul Mechanics has gone over so very many times before that these two things are in fact one and the same, that there is no difference between psyche and matter. It is the same material. It's just physics itself is the soul. The entirety of the world is the soul. And you have, for all intents and purposes, what we can dissect and psychologically dissect into being a mind, a body, and a spirit. So that's psyche, matter, ether. And these three things are interchangeable ultimately, but they do, in a matter of effect, communicate with each other as though they are separated, and there are various reasons for that. It's a part of the design of the human entity, which we have begun to get into and we'll get into further with the Anatomy of Identity course. But for the Sidetracks course, just there is the concept that we have a soul that is somehow separate from us, or that we're, it's separated, the self and the soul somehow, and the soul is subject to the scrutiny of some greater power that is apparently exceptionally judgmental, and for the most part can and does at many points in time go ahead and change its mind about what is in effect right and wrong, depending on the circumstances. And makes contracts with people and reneges on them regularly. It's just a very untrustworthy sort of higher power, this biblical God figure. And factor two, the second value that's put into play, is the concept of good and evil. That one can be good or evil depending on, how they behave as regards the circumstances that are presented to them. And this sort of presents a concept of responsibility, but for the most part, value A entirely removes responsibility from the equation, because ultimately what it says, what that's telling you, what it implies, is that you really have no choice in the matter. You need to be what is imposed upon you by the religious doctrine, or you are essentially garbage, you're worthless, you're meaningless. And they'll even go so far as to state, at the very least, the Jehovah's Witnesses, which, mind you, I was raised by Jehovah's Witnesses for the most part for a great deal of my childhood, and that's ultimately what really brought me into the theological field to begin with, what got me interested in it, and eventually turned me into such a fanatic in it, which, yes, I am a theology fanatic. I am not necessarily a religious fanatic, but I am a theology fanatic. I'm fascinated and even obsessed with the concept of God, what it is, what that means to us, what the practicalities of it are, and that's what led to soul mechanics and to all of this in general. But values that are presented throughout the course of the Bible, the other such doctrines, and the story of it in general, are going to be, one, presented in the Garden of Eden story, which, again, the Garden of Eden story is presented as the origin story. So that presents the value of origin. That's where things came from. That's the bottom line. That's the factor that creates the creative value in play, is that Garden of Eden story presents as the origin, even though it wasn't even really introduced immediately, and nothing in it, nothing that we know of it in modern day was introduced anywhere near at the beginning of the actual creation of this mythos, so to speak. But a value that is presented immediately in that origin story is going to be God as being this very vain sort of character that, demands attention and worship upon it, but if you try to hide from it, like what's presented when the two Adam and Eve eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they hide themselves. They begin to wear clothing because immediately they're aware that they are naked, and for whatever reason they become shameful of that, and they begin to hide themselves, and this upsets God because they're hiding from God. And I think that this speaks to various values. If you're looking at it from the first-person perspective, through that spectacle, again, you can see various realistic, practical values that present through it. As I've stated so many times, the voice of God will speak through the lies. If you're presented with a book that's full of bullshit lies, if you read it the correct way, if you read it from that first-person perspective, no matter what it is, it could be a fucking children's storybook, it's going to be speaking to you. This voice of God will be getting a true message across through it, regardless of how hard people try to hide it. In fact, it seems the more they try to hide it, the more clearly this voice will shout at any spotter who's paying attention with their eyes open. But it presents the concept of this God as being vanity, essentially. The biblical God is vanity, and this presents repeatedly throughout the story over and over and over again. Also, the concept of there being good and evil at all in the first place, let alone us being forbidden from understanding the nature or the difference between good and evil, presents an immediate division, and a division between peoples, which compounds this division we seem to have between our self and our soul, which is an immediate division from God itself. And then even we have a third factor removed, where there is this actual God creature or person presented. So it's essentially it's promoting division every step of the way. It's trying to divide you further and further from yourself, which in ultimate reality is the God figure, is the creative element in play. You are the creative force. And that's essentially what true spirituality is going to be, is this understanding that you are the creative force, that you are the creative factor, element in play, and that you are one with the world, that you are in fact co-creating with the rest of humanity. But that's neither here nor there at the moment. That doesn't speak to what we're getting at in this video. Another value that's presented is God having angels. Now, God has angels, okay? God has angels that go about doing his bidding, taking care of business for him, essentially. So, while we say that God is omnipotent, how does that play? How does that work? Why does God have angels? Why does God have servants, soldiers working for him if he's omnipotent? If God can do anything and knows all things and is, a step ahead of the game every turn, then why does God have subservient creatures working for him? See, that presents an immediate contradiction in the very understanding of it. God is obviously not omnipotent, and we have also the fallen angel factor, wherein one angel decides, hey, this is bullshit, fuck you, I'm getting out of here, I'm gonna go help these people because you're enslaving them, and that is what happened. The Lucifer character, the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, these characters, they taught humans how to protect themselves. They came down to earth and they taught humans how to forge weapons, how to essentially defend themselves, how to stick up for themselves, taught them to stick up for themselves, essentially tried to give them their responsibility back, although most of them didn't seem to get it. Obviously we still don't get it, but that is what happened in the story. If you remove the propaganda saying that Lucifer's army is evil demons and they're lying to you, if you actually just read the book without taking the propaganda into account, you're going to find that he was not lying to anybody. He was actually here helping us, and that every step of the way, everything that this fallen angel did to help humanity, propaganda was put in saying, well, he's lying to you, he's deceiving you. But was he? I mean, have we met with some kind of an apocalypse scenario wherein Satan pops up and says, ha ha ha, I tricked you the whole time? No, never happened. What did happen is that humanity did retain some sense of dignity and self-consideration. But we do have this fallen angel that went ahead and turned against God, and on top of that, we have such things as the Tower of Babel and the fall of Sodom, which that's kind of two separate incidents insofar as concerns of values, but the immediate value presented by this fallen angel even being in play at all is that no, God is not perfect. Obviously, God makes a fuck ton of mistakes. God is, for all intents and purposes, as the story regards the biblical character of God, a fucking moron. This dude does not have his shit together by any stretch. He's very, very, very childish, immature, very vain, insecure, just jealous, wrathful. They even define him as being jealous and wrathful. I mean, it's almost dumbfounding how people can read a part of the Bible that's going to say, well, whatever God does is good because he says so, but he's doing all these wrong things. But because he says it's right, because he's perfect, he's not perfect. That's obvious. That's very, very obvious. God was never a perfect character. God was not omnipotent, because not only did God have subservient creatures doing his bidding, apparently needed subservient creatures doing his bidding, but he also had subservient creatures that turned around and said, you're a shithead, fuck you, and turned on him. So, no. God is not really in control of anything, is he? Then we have the contradictions in worshiping the graven image. We have what I think is the third removed contract for the Ten Commandments. There were several variations of the Ten Commandments before the Ten Commandments that were given, or the actual 11 commandments that we are given. Now, not many religious people seem to be aware that we do in fact have 11 commandments in play, with Jesus having presented the 11th commandment, thou shalt do unto others as thou would have done unto self. And then we have, I mean, in those 10 commandments, those 10 commandments spell out the spectacle. If you're looking at it first person, we'll get into this in the secular theology course, but those 10 commandments really tell you what's really happening. They give you the lens through which to view this story that allows for you to have a crystal clear perspective on what's really going on. But at face value, we have these 10 commandments that say, thou shalt worship no God before me, thou shalt worship no false idols, thou shalt worship no graven image. I mean, over and over again, this God has to ensure that his insecurities are presented, that you really need to be purely focused on this God or you're damned, because he's so vain that he can't have you even so much as worshiping a fucking wax doll. And you have to worship it. You can't just like care or praise it or, you know, say, hey, that's cool. You have to be worshiping, like, knees to the ground, fucking bowing your head and shit, burning candles. And, well, be careful though which candles you burn, because they might be false idols. Anyways, so we have that because people are in fact worshiping Jesus before God, which is thou shalt worship no God before me. We have essentially Jesus is a false idol because he died. So everything that we the story says that he was proposed to have been plotting to die and be resurrected, but there's no proof of the resurrection. The only people that we have testimony of him having been resurrected are the people who were in fact indoctrinated cultists following him in the first place. What we do have is, the Roman Empire and the Jews having murdered him and made use of his image, his graven image, to run this cult. So we're worshiping the false idol, worshiping a God before God, and we are worshiping a literal graven image of a dead man nailed to a cross. I've said this so many times before, it's not worth repeating, but that's the value presented there, is that it's a fraud. It's lying to you immediately. And then we have such instances as the fall of Babel and Saddam, like Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed not because of any sexual acts whatsoever. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because two angels, two subservient creatures, happened to be in that town, and there was a mob who were threatening them, who were out banging outside the door trying to get these angels out so they could beat the fuck out of them, and God nuked the fucking city because of it. Gave fair warning, allowed for the angels, and Lot and his wife, technically his wife didn't really make it, did she? But Lot's wife having died, by the way, is part of the evidences we have as to it actually being a nuclear incident. But we have this entire city being destroyed because two of God's angels were being threatened. We have the Tower of Babel, wherein God actually confused the entirety of the world, changed their languages and tricked them, deceived them, precisely as it says that the evildoers are doing. It suggests that evil is deception, and that there are Lucifer's people, or Satan now people are deceiving you, yet God goes ahead and deceives the entirety of humanity by mismatching their languages to prevent them from finishing this tower that in some way threatened God's integrity, that God was afraid. So we have God is afraid, of people building a tower that rivals its glory somehow. We have God being afraid on second part by two of his angels being threatened. So God's scared, and God is wrathful. We know God's wrathful, so God's wrathful in a response. God's going to destroy entire civilizations because he's afraid of his own creations. All of this presents God as being this totally insecure monstrous sort of a person or creature or what have you. So how does this relate to atheism? Why is this title, this part of the series titled Atheism? How does these religious factors present there? Well, take a look at it. Anybody with their eyes open is going to see that this is bullshit. Nobody's going to fucking be scammed by this. It's an easy spot. If you just take a look at religion with a critical view, with a realistic perspective, you're going to find that it's entirely unbelievable. It's irrational. There's no possible way that you can take this to any extent as being fact and rational, even, or reasonable to any extent. So, of course, you're going to discard the religion. However, throughout the course of the indoctrination involved with this religion, you are in fact taught that any other previous spirituality, earlier traditions, are evil as well, that they're all deceptive, they're all serving this Satan or devil character, they're all wrong, they're all bad, they're all to be dismissed. Christianity, Catholicism, whichever one, Islam even, is the only true religion. It's the one true religion with the one true God, and all the others are false, all the others are lying, all the others are evil. And so you have that programmed into your head by the time that you figure out this religion is bullshit. So when you discard this religion, you go ahead and simultaneously discard all of the other spiritualities along with it. In fact, you jumble them all together, and you're programmed to think that they're all one and the same. Not only are you programmed to think that they're all one and the same, but you're programmed to think that the earlier traditions are somehow beneath the biblical traditions. So you go ahead and you discard all of them, and that's where we get what amounts to the atheist movement we're seeing today, is not actually atheism, but anti-theism, in the sense that they don't care about any of it. They don't care what's real or what's true about any of it. They don't care to investigate any of the rational, realistic facts involved in earlier traditions and earlier spiritualities. They're not even going to go ahead and give it a shot to look into any of the teachings they have, because they've been programmed by religion to discard those spiritualities in discarding this religion. And so they are now entirely anti-theistic. They are deliberately standing against anything that comes across to them as being religious. And because religion programmed them to look down on the earlier spiritualities, it's automatically associated. See, it's all part of this trick. I mean, do you think that they actually, if you do think that religion was designed to manipulate people, do you think that the people who designed it were that fucking stupid that they would create something so ridiculous and expect you to believe it? It's a lose-lose situation. It's a catch-22 trick. Either you fall for it and you totally buy into religion, you discard any of the real, true spiritualities from earlier traditions, and you believe thoroughly in this modern religion, or B, you realize the trick, you realize the scam. For the most part, you realize the scam of the religion itself, you throw it away, and by default, you discard your own spirituality along with it, going ahead and entirely disconnecting yourself from the reality of God. Like, religion presents God as being an evil character. Do you not see that that's what it thinks, that's what it feels, that's what religion wants you to believe? God is evil, God is wrong, and ultimately, if you manage to wake up from that specific piece of the trap, you go ahead and believe that God doesn't exist at all. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that it didn't exist. That's what religion is doing. It's convincing you that God doesn't exist. It's convincing you that there is no spirituality to be, there is no connection to be made, and thereby we discard our spirituality entirely, which is like our friend 434, the message that we did, the interdimensional warning for all humans, where he said that there's no spirituality involved in our creation, and that's what's going to lead to our destruction. That's what is going to lead to our destruction. We are being cut off from the reality of an existing God, and that is what modern atheism is standing for. So that's about all the time I have for this video. I'm sorry, I wish you could get into it deeper. We will in further videos in the series, but thank you all so much for watching. Kila Salai, Terviuni Siari, Namaste.